And we are going live in about 10 seconds.
Welcome everyone to today's preview of the Yardi Property Council PropTech survey results. My name is Jess Kerr, Deputy Executive Director at the Property Council of Australia, and I have the pleasure of hosting today's live event. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we attend this event and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people with us today. A few housekeeping items for this live event. Throughout the presentation and discussion, you'll be able to submit questions via the Q&A function. Please click the speech bubble button on the right-hand corner to submit your questions throughout. And before we get started, I'd like to extend our thanks to Yardi for partnering with us for the second year to deliver this PropTech survey, and further acknowledge their long-standing support of the Property Council across many of our states and divisions, and of course, the long-standing support of the Property Congress. There's no denying technology across all realms has played a critical role in business continuity as we've navigated the pandemic. Bernie will discuss in more detail this shift in adoption and other key takeaways and trends in comparison to last year's survey. We'll then be joined by an expert panel who break down the hype that surrounds PropTech and at times overwhelms the industry. They'll discuss trends at a national and international level, as well as the role that technology plays in achieving sustainability goals. A big thank you to Bernie and the Yardi team, and I would also like to recognise our research team for gathering the data and crunching the numbers. And of course, a big thank you to all of you who participated in filling out the survey. We are so fortunate today to be joined by our expert panel, Sheridan Ware, Chief Technology Officer from Charter Hall, Nikki Greenberg, Head of Technology, Strata and Digital Management at QRC, and Jonathan Hannon, Co-founder and Managing Director at Taronga Group, who will join Bernie on the panel. A huge thank you for taking time out of what I know is incredibly busy schedules. So Bernie, without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to you.
Thanks, Jess, and good morning, everyone. Welcome. My name's Bernie Devine, Regional Director, APAC for Yardi, and really pleased to be able to continue the work with Property Council this year. It's been a long journey in putting together this survey as a concept across multiple regions globally. And it first happened nearly 20 years ago, but more recently, a strong focus on APAC and understanding both the Asian and the Australian market. So as part of that, what we've really done is try to understand what's the view of people in the industry on what's happening with technology, and what's the future look like, and making sure that we get some depth to that through working with people like Property Council to really get some decent data. And I think that's a good example of where by partnering with industry associations, we help the industry learn more, we help the industry get stronger and grow. And that's really the reason why we work with organisations like Property Council. And next slide, please. And so to get to the survey, I think a couple of key things I would mention in terms of what we found and who participated. So first up, really saying it was, again, more than 170 participants in the survey, and some really interesting results, but at the same time, good diversity in the respondents. So we had all sectors in terms of types of assets owned. We had quite a few different organisational roles, but I think the telling thing is that more than 70% of the respondents were responsible for owning and managing, investing in and managing property, and in fact more than 50% over 100 million AUM, so not insignificant. And similarly, a very significant proportion of very experienced people, quite a few with more than 20 years experience, and quite a few in the C-suite. So some great, I guess, insights to what people are thinking and people who are of influence, etc. So really, I think you'll find that the survey results are, as I would put them, I'd always say they're indicative. It talks about a range of factors, and I wouldn't say that the numbers are absolute, because obviously the size of the survey, but with 170 respondents, still very much indicative of what a lot of people in the industry are thinking. And the other thing about respondents has been the fact that we've seen an indicative shift in the proportion of revenue spent on technology, and I think that's a key factor to understand, is that pandemic or not, over the last 12 months, there has been an uptick in the level of spend on technology in the industry. Next slide, please. So as part of that, I think the key takeaways we want to highlight here, and this is probably the main point for our discussion today, is a range of things, and that is that really technology now is being seen as having a significant impact on a new area, something that didn't really come up previously, and that is sustainability. I think it's been around for a while, but I think really the last 12, 18 months has been a strong uptick. We've seen it globally, we've seen it across APAC and in Australia. Very much a much greater interest in sustainability issues and reporting and in getting data. And I think the key thing for us is that it's really about getting the data, finding the data, being able to use the data, and then being able to see the data and report on it, right? And what we've done is also found that quite a lot of respondents still have a view that real estate is lagging other industries, and I wouldn't disagree with that. When you look at the proportion of revenue that organisations spend on technology, if you compare the real estate industry to banks and telcos, we're a long way behind. If you compare it to others, we're actually quite down the list, and some would say at the bottom, or just maybe up a little bit from the bottom in terms of some of the other industries, but nonetheless improving in terms of the level of spend, as the number said. And the other thing is that everyone had a view on the impact of the pandemic, and more than 50% said it had had a significant impact on their spend in technology. In fact, quite a few CIOs that I spoke to had a view that they wish they'd spent more early on. And then the other thing I think is was a view around Australia's position versus the rest of the world, and that we're trailing. And I'd certainly say there's some challenges there in terms of being able to demonstrate the same level of investment, the same level of adoption, the same level of innovation as perhaps some other markets. Lots of reasons for that, including things like market density, market maturity, the availability of capital specifically for PropTech. And I'm sure some of our speakers will have some views on that. But the other thing that I think is the trend, both in terms of the view of being behind and the view of being behind, both in the industry and across industries and globally, is moving in the right direction. And I think that's important. But the other key thing that really was highlighted this year was the whole issue of spreadsheets, and the fact that there are still a significant number of organisations using spreadsheets for quite a considerable portion of what they do. So if you look at the whole issue of sort of automating process, well, spreadsheets don't do that, right? So that means that they're not getting the benefit of automated process. And similarly, when it comes to, like I said before, finding the data, using the data, being able to see the data, spreadsheets, to be honest with you, are not the greatest friends in helping you do that, because they're high risk, right? They're prone to errors. That's been proven. And Yeah, that I think is potentially one of the greatest barriers, is that people think that a spreadsheet, barriers to adoption of systems, is people think spreadsheets are good enough. The other thing that I think it's important here is just the view of the future, and that is to say, what's the future focus? What are we going to spend our money on? And the main thing there has really been around saying that over the next few years, there are a couple of key trends. One, business process automation. Two, ESG, and a growing focus on investing in tools to help with reporting. And in my view, you know, what I've seen, what we've seen across the region and globally, is that a lot of organisations, when it comes to ESG, are still really focused on not so much a business process that delivers sustainability, but really just on reporting on what they've done. And that means that it's, for many organisations, it's still an afterthought. So until organisations are really automating the processes that are associated with delivering sustainability, and the other aspects of ESG, there's going to be a real challenge with getting that data into reporting, because it becomes quite difficult when all you're doing is chasing around and trying to find stuff that's in spreadsheets instead of having it delivered automatically out of processes. And you know, I think that very much tells the story of what people's view of the future looks like, and that is that it looks like business process automation is key, and that might just be in replacing spreadsheets around finance and around the lead to lease cash cycle, revenue. So and it could also very much be around ESG. So they're key areas, and I think that's really the message here, is that there is an ongoing expectation, and in fact, you know, I think just looking at some of the detail, I'm going to skip through this real quick because I think I've covered most of the points, but really the fact that what we've seen over the last 12 months is a recognition that we all spent a lot of money in the first quarter of 2020 focusing on collaboration tools. Everyone bought Teams and Zoom and other such things. But now although that's still a key issue, there's a much stronger focus now on standardizing data and documenting processes. I mean, I think that's one of the key things around the whole issue of business process automation. Similarly, I think the other key thing to take away from the report is the fact that you know, there is still and always has been a very strong issue with resistance to change. And when we asked what are the things that are slowing down adoption, two things I'd comment on. One, yeah, resistance to change. I don't like change. Change is painful, uncomfortable, so let's not do it. And two is around an issue of and a perception that we need specialist resources who know how to develop and customize software. And in a world where we're now very much moving to the cloud, we're moving to SaaS, we're moving to off-the-shelf tools. Now I think there's, to some degree, a level of misconception around that, because if you can rely much more on tools that bring together a holistic platform, then your need for those sorts of resources is diminished. So I think there's some education to be done here, and that's another reason why we focus on getting this survey every year, is to help understand where there are misconceptions and then help sort of educate the industry on what we can do about it. Next slide, please. Then I think, in fact, let's jump forward one more. Yeah, so I think the key things here are the fact that what we really have, actually one more thing, is very much a focus on where to next. Business process automation, big data analytics, access control systems, clearly the pandemic's had an effect where people are thinking we've got to improve our access control systems, get them to touchless, etc. And to an extent, it's really pleasing to see that the buzzwords of AI and the metaverse and other such things are probably lower down the list this year. That's fantastic, because I think a lot of organisations have really struggled with that, and sort of focused on some shiny toys instead of things that they really need to get done from a business perspective. So next slide, please. Yeah. So where to next? And I think it's a great way to segue to the panel. You've heard enough from me. So what I'd like to do is ask the panel to join me to talk about this document, the survey, and the fact that what we have done is highlighted the fact that change and resistance to change is a big issue, that investment is improving but has somewhere to go, that the pandemic's definitely had an effect, that ESG has become more of a feature for everyone, more of a concern for everyone. But at the heart, there's still a need to automate process. And so with that, I'd like to sort of ask the panel. In fact, I'm going to go to Sheridan first and ask Sheridan an interesting question, because I think Sheridan's a person who I've known for some time and has always been very focused on helping businesses improve their adoption of technology and respond to the needs of the industry and the needs of the business with appropriate solutions. So Sheridan, we're now pretty much 2 years into the pandemic, and I guess what would be an interesting understanding would be, looking back now, if you knew in March 2020 what you know now, what would have you done differently?
Oh, it's such a difficult question, Bernie. Obviously, the pandemic has been tragic at a macro level for so many, and it's been a really difficult time for people. But I also think it was a silver lining, and going in, we were very lucky. There was very little in our technology stack that needed changing because we were so cloud-based already. So I really felt for those companies that weren't in such a good position from a technology perspective. And we certainly, dare I say, had a little bit of fun prototyping a whole lot of solutions to challenges that we didn't see coming around health and safety, for example. So that was actually a lot of fun, and we already have a very good test and learn culture. So that was us at our best, and we worked across our business to deal with the ambiguity. And one of the things I would say I'm really proud of is the way that we lent in on wellbeing. I think we had to shift really quickly, whilst always having a focus on wellbeing. We had to shift really deeply into what does that mean under these circumstances. And I don't know about you guys, but I've had more conversations about mental health in the last 2 years than I think I ever have in my life, and I think that's a good thing. But I suppose what I would do differently is I would have realised, I should have realised that it was a marathon and it wasn't a sprint. I think we did so much in the first few weeks of lockdown that we didn't really have a sense that it would be going on this long. And I think people have a real sense of fatigue coming out of the last 2 years, and that maybe a 2-week holiday over Christmas isn't going to fix. And I think that sort of COVID hangover from a mental health perspective is something that we'll really need to watch and to simplify people's lives as much as we can to help them sort of get back to being fighting fit.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's been a real challenge. And I think what we've seen is a lot of organisations like yourself really focused on getting people into a state where they could work effectively from home and use cloud-based tools. But at the same time, quite a few organisations, as I said in my intro, really thought like we wish we'd done more. And so I think that is definitely part of the trend, is that folks are recognising that although they might have done a lot, there's definitely areas where they can still continue to improve. And Nikki, you've had a lot of experience around the world in terms of what different organisations have done in different places, and I think that contrasts to myself with a focus on APAC, but talking to my colleagues globally in terms of what we're seeing other clients do. And you know, one of the things that's interesting for me is that Australia's led the way for some time around sort of the 10x experience space. But we've now seen the rest of the world really adopt that dramatically with changes forced in some respects, I think, by COVID. So what have you seen in terms of a sort of an international view of what's happening in Australia and what we could do more of?
Yeah, thank you. And I suppose just for context and, you know, piggybacking off Sheridan's answer, now thinking back to March 2020, I was living in New York at the time. I'd been working there and living there for 4 years, and you know, being at the heart of the COVID crisis with, you know, the city falling apart and the real estate industry just taking a deep dive. You know, you were really at the heart of a changing city where technology was seen as the solution. You know, in New York at the time, occupancy of buildings went from 0% to a maximum 9-15%. And this is something that went on for 2 years. You can only imagine the impact that it had on the industry. So I think it was quite interesting in quite a few regards because, you know, the industry really came together to support each other, to share ideas, to share insights, to share best practice, to act quickly and swiftly. You hear about some of the most amazing technologies such as, you know, RXR, they created their Well app, which they actually sold for a huge amount of money recently. I know the number, but I won't say. You know, and there was a landlord that created a technology in response to an immediate need. Now, there was a recognition in the industry that the only way that we could bring it back to life was through technology, by thinking about safety, wellness. You know, how can you communicate the occupancy of the building? How can you communicate the, you know, the level of contamination, you know, the cleanliness of the air? You know, all of these considerations it was happening in real time, and leveraging technologies that already existed. It just became this kind of like bubble up of, you know, we need it right now. It's not a sunk cost. It's not an investment that we're not going to see something, you know, not come back. This is the way that we're going to keep the, you know, the industry alive and bring people back to the office. You know, just this incredible sense of urgency. So yeah, definitely tenant experience played a part, less so for, you know, the fun bells and whistles of, hey, let's create community. It's about, well, you know, how can we communicate important things about, you know, health, wellness, you know, who's going to be at the office when, you know, when is this all going to happen? So that was definitely a huge consideration there at the time. Yeah, and how do you think, I mean, to me, that whole health and wellness thing really is part of a broader ESG question. I mean, it is very much you know, focused on the well-being of the workforce, and therefore, you know, I think, as I said at the start, one of the things that's been a real concern for me is the fact that when I look at, you know, the core of what we do, Yardi does as an organisation in terms of automating process around leasing and around investment management, etc., and accounting, is that whole piece around people management, our clients have not really had the same focus on that in terms of putting together business process and then getting data out of that business process. It's been very much sort of an afterthought, and I think that's something that the industry is still struggling with, is that ESG in many respects is an afterthought. Yet, you know, we're now seeing for the first time in this survey the fact that ESG is coming up as a much stronger issue. Jonathan, your organisation has recently taken a much stronger focus on ESG, and I think with good reason. Your focus very much obviously on investing in startups and helping them come to the market and deliver great solutions. If you take what Nikki was just talking about in terms of health and wellness, and obviously Sheridan mentioned that as well. What are you seeing in that space these days?
Well, thanks, Bernie, and thanks to all from the PCA for hosting this one as well. It's I think the timing is really interesting. So and I might start off, Bernie, by we don't really invest into startups. So what we recognized very early on was that the real estate world was actually not equipped to work with startups. You know, as an industry, we like to see that the companies, the emerging tech is, you know, working in another market, that the technology is tried and tested and trusted. And so we actually invest into companies that are scaling. And I think that's a really big differentiator, because what we're seeing is that there is a much higher level of adoption when people can actually see that the technology, it's already working in the US or in Israel or in Europe, and therefore it's easier to put into an asset in Sydney. The whole shift to ESG, and if we look at our deal flow over the last 2 to 3 years, I think 2 years ago there was a lot of construction technology, a lot of system, I guess, process changes that would make the construction process safer, more measurable, allow owners of real estate to understand what was actually happening on their construction sites. And that was quite an interesting shift. And I guess probably about 18 months ago, all of our investors started to ask more about what we were seeing in the ESG space. So institutional capital, the groups that are backing, the Dexuses and the Vicinities, the sovereign wealth funds, they've all made quite a strong commitment to invest into this space. And when capital talks, obviously the managers start to move. So I think it's filtering down. And I think, for many of the Australian groups, they were already at the forefront of the market for sustainability. And what's now started to change is that they're now focusing more on the S and the G, so the social side and the governance aspects. Because obviously listed companies, if they are aware of a technology that can actually make a construction site safer, those board members have a fiduciary role to actually implement that technology. And that's where we're starting to see quite a shift. Maybe just picking up on the impact of COVID and what we would have done differently. I think the COVID has actually accelerated this focus on innovation and technology for many of the groups. So we've seen an uptick in, I guess, interest in the space at the most senior levels. So in the past, we might speak with innovation teams or with the sustainability teams within a corporate. But now this is the exec team and the boards that are getting involved. And I think what people are recognizing is that this is not a cost, it's actually an opportunity for additional revenue. And that's when it starts to actually hit home. So there's a lot to unpack there, but yeah, the space is now, it is booming. And I think in the earlier comments, we talked about the hype. There is a fair level of hype in this space, so we need to cut through that. But it is becoming more corporate.
Okay, cool, thank you. Look, I think if I just maybe we take a little bit of a shift in the approach for a minute. I think ESG is very much an important aspect of it. But the other thing I think to understand a little more is really around that resistance to change issue. And I think that's something that the industry needs help with and needs to work on. And what we've seen is very much the fact that although we bring a solution that delivers a set of outcomes, and we bring a team that can make that work, it's the broader change within a business. And when people come to us and say, "Oh, I just want to buy your software," I'm very hesitant, because it's like, that's not what you want to buy. What you really want to buy, what you want to be saying to me is, I want to change my business, right? And by doing so, and part of that process of changing my business is looking at technology to see how it can help enable and reinforce change. And that's really about bringing new habits, if I could use that. Business processes are habits, doing the same thing consistently, bringing new habits to a business. So that it improves. Right? That's I think the thing we've all learned is that the only way to really change is to change your habits. And so Sheridan, Nikki, thoughts on what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong, what we could do more of in terms of helping our businesses change? Either of you want to jump in?
Why don't I jump in there, Nikki?
Yeah,
I think, I think you're right, Bernie. I think we lose sight of the outcomes that we're trying to get to when we start focusing on the technology, and it's really critical that we focus on those outcomes and more importantly on the people that have to work to produce those outcomes. And I think the key question we have to really get involved in is, how do people do work now, and how could they do it differently in order to get to a different outcome, and to allow the people that actually do the work to redesign what they do in order to produce a different result. And I think that human focus is absolutely critical, because frankly, people will change if it's change that they've designed for themselves in a way that's made their life more simple or easier. And so I think the really big thing that we have to do is actually stop talking about the technology, start getting laser focused on the outcomes, and start getting deeply curious about people and how we can help them create the change that they want to see in order to get to the outcome. But I'll love your thoughts, Nikki.
Yeah, 100%. I think, we talk about the technology a lot, but at the end of the day, people are the users. And one of the things that happens is when we start using terms like PropTech, you actually lose a lot of people on the journey. I know that there was a very good response to register to attend this event, but we didn't get the entire industry. And there shouldn't be, church and state. Technology is for everybody in the organisation to use and to understand the trends. We've all got these iPhones that we just pick up and use. We've all got laptops. We've all come on this journey of being able to use different tech as part of our everyday. And one of the problems that I see across the industry is sometimes, tech gets put in its own team, and then it's thought that, oh, that team looks after tech and innovation and everybody does their job and they're told what to do, which is the wrong approach. And I've definitely been talking to the PCA about this. I know this is something that they're very interested in doing, but really expanding the education for the industry, where technology is part of every single discussion, every single working group, every single panel, because this is a new frontier for our business, for our industry to really embrace. And we're actually needing to bring every single individual along on the journey and know that it's not difficult. We all engage with technology every day, and technology is for everyone to be involved in. I can see Sheridan wanting to jump back in.
I was just going to say, Nikki, I love that point. I love it so much because, that we've had conversations about how we're trying to do that at Charter Hall. But more recently, I actually took on academia, and I created a PropTech course for UTS and was helping to have conversations about what we can do with the property economics course. And it's the same thing. We call this as a separate module that you may or may not want to learn about. Whereas I think the actual learning needs to start there, and it needs to be embedded in everything we do. So when you're doing evaluations course, you should be learning how to use tools like Forbury and not just Excel, for example, because they can make your life easier. But we've got to start, I think, also with the students.
Yeah, I think you're right. Sharon. I think one of the key things is the fact that ESG, I've sort of formed a view that as long as organisations have an ESG officer, they have a problem because they're viewing it as something separate. Whereas, so instead of the investment manager gets a question from an investor, says, I'll send that to the ESG person because they know the answer. The investment manager should know the answer, right? Because that means that ESG is now part of what the investment manager knows and does. And that's where I think the change comes. And the role of the ESG person is really to help make sure that all of the team know their business from an ESG perspective rather than doing the work for them. And that's a fundamental shift that the industry needs to take. And I also think that you're right, getting this down to the level of university classes where everyone learns at the heart what is the basics of making things work. Absolutely agree, and something that I think we all need to do more of. And Jonathan, I think we're going to jump around a little here. We've got a question on ESG, so I think we should deal with that. I'm just thinking about how we get to that, which was.
That's right, Jeff. There, I can just read it out to you if you like.
That'd be fantastic.
So Jonathan, you mentioned tech improving safety on construction sites as one of the early examples of ESG systems process changes. Can you provide some other examples of ESG focused tech shifts, either emerging now or what you expect to see to come in the fore in the next year or two?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. So I'll talk about some of the actual companies that we've invested into, and they're businesses that, as I sort of describe them, you'll see how it is responding to the question. So the first one I would talk about is Open Space, which is a software company out of the US that uses an off-the-shelf digital camera, and site managers walk the site daily, and as he or she walks the site, it documents all of the work that has occurred and compares it live with the BIM modeling. So it's a direct comparison with where work should be. But where this actually goes to is it creates a complete digital rendition of the asset as it's being built. And so that's going to become really relevant for insurers, for bankers. And imagine if you were about to buy another $1 billion asset at Charter Hall, and you can actually see the entire digital construction as part of your due diligence. And that's going to make it actually a much more compelling investment if you can see that it's been correctly built. So we see that as a really strong company, and we've actually just followed in with our third investment into the company. Out of the UK, we've invested into a company called Voyage Control. And what we're seeing in Europe is that many of the groups, the European property groups, are now having to report on Scope 3 emissions. And that's the emissions that are actually created through the customer journey. And so Voyage, it actually came out of the ports and logistics business. And they've created a software that actually digitalizes the arrival of deliveries onto sites or at ports. But it documents that journey. And it becomes, again, from Bernie's point of view, moving away from spreadsheets and WhatsApp in many cases to actually having a digital record of the journey of that investment or that product. And so that allows us to then measure the outcomes and to actually measure the Scope 3. So I think that's those sort of companies, and maybe a third one, a business that was in our Singapore growth program called Hubble. So on a construction site at the moment, this was a business that the Singapore government basically it used this system to ensure that construction workers had been correctly COVID tested. So you might recall that Singapore had quite a big outbreak in construction workers, and it shut down the entire country. And so if you can actually have a better understanding of who the worker is, and often construction workers, many of them do have smartphones. Hubble is a way to actually ensure that the worker actually has the right qualifications for the job, but also now in this environment, they actually have the right vaccinations. So there's a lot of really interesting software solutions in that space, and they lead to a financial outcome. Open space leads to a better quality construction and reduce waste. So if you've got fewer errors on a construction site, and they're actually looking at 10 to 12% reduction in construction costs through the use of this technology. So why wouldn't you use it? And so that's where this gets really compelling, and how we're actually overcoming that resistance to change is to demonstrate the financial benefit of many of these companies. So we target the CIO, we target the CFO, and if you can actually have probably a good example of a major global group now. So if you think of an Ivanhoe Cambridge, their chief innovation officer is also the CIO. And that's where innovation needs to be, to ensure that the entire organization understands that this is relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think, look, one of the things that comes out of that again is the whole issue of how do we help organizations to understand the options that are available to them, to understand how they can change. Going back to Sheridan's point, you need the users to really be interested in change. But to do that, they need to know what's in the realm of the possible, right? And that sort of comes back to the role of the CIO as and the technology team and the innovation team to really bring opportunities to the business and help educate the business in what's in the realms of the possible. And that, again, I think is really a key focus here, has to be around education, right? And about bringing people up to where they need to be able to really drive that continuous improvement in their business. And Sheridan, I think that's something you wanted to comment on as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just goes off what I was saying before around focusing on the outcomes first. I mean, it's absolutely imperative on my team to understand technology trends and what's possible and provide that inspiration within Charter Hall, as well as for our investor and tenant customers and building communities. But we've got to work for a lot of our time on the other side, understanding what is it we're trying to get done, what are our priorities, what are those outcomes we're trying to produce. And we're working with Jonathan and other venture capitalists around the world to help us survey the space, and so that when we can clearly state, here's what we're trying to get done, they're an incredible resource in terms of telling us what's out there that might be already working in terms of how other people are achieving those objectives. And so I think it's incredibly important that we have a thriving PropTech community, but also as part of that, a thriving venture capital community. And it's great to see Taronga down here and thriving because they play such an critical role in helping us connect technology to the outcomes that we're trying to produce.
Yeah, Jonathan, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, the way we set up our business was we have a fund that has obviously a higher barrier of entry where companies have to make a significant investment in order to be a fund participant. But I guess we recognize that in order to really create this ecosystem, we needed also to have a broader pool of partners. And that's where we have our growth programs focused. So at the moment, for the next growth program, we've just completed our program in Singapore. And so the next program we have is fully focused on ESG impact. And we've already signed up ISPT, Dexus, PJM Real Estate, groups like Vicinity Centres, International Towers, Lendlease. So this idea of bringing together an entire ecosystem where actually the corporates exchange a lot of information as well as getting access to that innovation and technology. Because I think a lot of the teams, it's interesting in this space, the VCs actually collaborate very closely. The real estate innovation teams actually collaborate very closely, even though the real estate groups themselves might be competing against each other on an asset. So I think we need to create that broader, I guess, ecosystem of the entire real estate, the world of real estate to make this work, and that's actually what we've tried to do with our growth program.
Hey, I might just jump in on that, Jonathan, because it's such a good question. It's just such a good point. So we struggle, if I could be frank, even with our scale, to convince some PropTechs to come over here from the likes of London or the US. I mean, and let's be honest, compared to markets like New York, we're tiny. And so they are better off focusing their energies on building out the States or building out Europe rather than coming here. But I do think, to Nikki's point before, there's this great opportunity for us to leverage our collective scale to do those things that we really want to shift the needle on as an industry, whether it is things like ESG or getting a better handle on property data so that we can really supercharge our valuations and property analytics. I think we do have to have those conversations and decide those areas where we're not necessarily competitive and it makes more sense to be collaborative. I don't know, Nikki, whether you would say that you'd seen any of that from your wonderful international experience.
Yeah, well, 100%. And I suppose almost looping back into Bernie's original statement, the other buzzword I throw in there is just really around culture. That there has to be a culture of innovation and seeking and culture of collaboration. New York's a very special place, especially when it comes to wheeling and dealing and swapping deals, especially what Jonathan described in the VC community. You'll always be able to get a meeting with a VC and they'll tell you everything they know, everything they're seeing. And I think this is something that, we'll benefit from more as an industry, is the more that we can share and collaborate and swap the names of vendors, have transparency around what we're working on, then, as a destination, we can definitely bring in, the top vendors and have great insights to grow our PropTech ecosystem. There are great organizations in the space that, do have PropTech in their title, but there should be a PropTech event every day. There should be a PropTech breakfast every day. There should be, when I came back here, I connected with every single person, including, Sheridan and Jonathan, for a coffee catch up to say, what's happening here? What's happening here? And very quickly, I managed to get a sense of, how it is. And I can tell you it's pretty fun and exciting, especially in the PropTech space, where you have a lot of, a lot of young guns, a lot of enthusiasm. It's new frontiers. To actually be able to be part of this conversation about saying, well, hey, let's try something new, let's do something different, and let's actually swap notes with our competitors in the space, because, as a destination, as an industry, we're going to get a lot further when we work together on this.
So that's a good point, Nikki. And I think one of the things that I think comes out of that is the fact, you've got this energy, you've got this focus. On the one hand, what I see is sometimes you have startups, PropTechs that have they have some idea, but the reality is it's not really a problem that someone needs solved, right? What are you doing? What are you selling to who and for how much? In other words, who has a problem? What's that problem worth, and how are you solving it? And that to me has always been one of the challenges for the industry, is the fact that you'll often find organisations that will start up with something and they'll get some investment and they'll start to grow. They'll find a few clients, and as one of the large organisations said to me recently, their challenge was, and as I said before, for some it's a challenge finding a solution. For others, the challenge was finding a solution that would be around, that would be consistent. In other words, there were too many solutions in some respects, and the challenge was finding the ones that wouldn't pivot to something else in 6 months' time, or run out of money and therefore not be there to continue to support their product. So I think that's an issue globally, but nonetheless something that I think the Australian market's quite concerned about, given the fact that a lot of this comes from overseas and that we're a relatively small market. Have you seen any thoughts on how you can pick winners? And I know Jonathan has some views on this, because that's what his business is picking winners. But I guess, Sheridan, what are the things that you look for when you're looking at vendors and what they bring to the market?
Yeah, like Jonathan, we aren't really interested in very, very early stage startups. We've got a business of scale, and we've got to know that when we can prove out that this is the right way of going for us, that we can scale that really fast. What I would say though is, like Jonathan would do when he's choosing who to invest in, we do get really, really focused, not just on the technology, but the team that's going to be delivering. We don't do big bang, multi-million-dollar technology rollouts. We do get in the minimal thing that you can and keep developing and testing and learning from there. So you've got to know that you've got the right team with the right cultural fit that will jump in and get really, really deep with you in terms of understanding people and working with them every single day to test the next thing and then the next thing and then the next thing, until finally you have something that is at pilot stage and that can ultimately be rolled out and scaled. So we're really, really keen, not just on product, but also on looking at partnership and whether they're a good cultural fit, and will enhance our culture rather than detract from it.
Yeah, I might follow up on that. We're a little bit different to what Sheridan described, whereas we operate in two speeds. For QRC Real Estate, we have close to 18 billion in assets under management, predominantly shopping centres, commercial real estate, and our parent company QRC itself has 100 billion under management. So we're a big beast. We're very careful about how we operate, and especially when we're onboarding technology from a security and risk perspective, it's a big exercise. So we operate in two speeds. You know, at the moment we are onboarding big enterprise systems that are years in the making, that are foundational technologies, and we're seeing those advance. But at the same time, we're looking at some, you know, quicker initiatives, because we do have such a large portfolio where we can trial different things on them as pilot cases. But I think the big thing for us is that the way that we operate is that we operate through strategy, and we actually work with different partners to define, okay, what is our roadmap? Underneath our roadmap, what are the initiatives that we want to implement? And that's what we follow. Because we're such a big beast and we're so spread out, that's the way that we have to do it. But, you know, for me, I love working with, young, enthusiastic, incredibly smart vendors. I've been the first in a few circumstances to use different technologies where I've seen promise, and it's been great to actually see them come to life. Bling Buy in the US being one, Resident being another one in the US. There's others that I absolutely love, and I then get to sit on their advisory boards, which is also great, and being part of that journey. But the reality is that if you are a early stage PropTech, and if you're trying to get a big customer like a QRC or all the rest, you've actually really got to be able to jump through hoops to show that you're not going to land us in hot water because your security protocol is not right. You've actually, if you want to be with the big guns, you've got to be able to operate in that space and have that maturity. You can't have anything that's slapdash. You've got to be taking this very seriously. So I'd be recommending to anyone looking to work with a big organization such as ours, find a partner that has that credibility, align yourselves with them, and come and talk to us. And I always do a little plug, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm very active there. Feel free to drop me a line and let me know what you're working on or what you find interesting.
Yeah.
And maybe I could add, Bernie, so what do we look for in a company? And I think, from a VC point of view, there's a lot of focus on the founder and the person or the team that's leading the business. But I think what we look for, I guess, is that a solution that is scalable. So we're not going to invest into a company that makes the acquisition of a residential project in Australia more efficient, because it's not going to be able to scale into other markets necessarily. We're not going to do something that is just local and focused on one market. And we often won't invest until we see, I guess, a trigger or an indication from the company that they're looking to expand at least into Asia. So for a lot of the US companies we look at, if they don't have an Asian strategy, that we can't really add much value to them, because there's a lot of capital in the US, there's a lot of customers, but where we can actually add value is if they're looking to expand into this region. And I think the last thing is that because we are backed by real estate groups, we come to this with a real estate lens, in that we're quite actually cautious. And I think it comes back to, as I guess Nikki touched on, reputation is everything in this space. So when an emerging tech company presents to us, we believe everything they tell us. We write it down, and then we watch and we wait. And we're very cautious and patient in our investment process. And we might make a small investment, but we will actually link our capital to them delivering an outcome. And so if they can demonstrate that they've won a major customer that they've told us that was already signed, then we might invest more money. And so it's a very risk-averse approach to investing into this space, because we are backed by real estate groups who are in themselves quite risk-averse.
That's a good point. And likewise, I mean, even for ourselves, quite often perceived as the incumbent who needs to be disrupted, when in fact what we aim to do in many respects is be the disruptor, because although we do have that foundation of an ERP for real estate as our core product, we're constantly looking at the market, looking at the industry, and saying, seeing what people have to say about solutions, what they need, and then establishing, even within our own organisation, small teams with a brief that says, go and see if you can figure that out, and then really fostering them and growing new products and new solutions. And at any one time, we'd have about a dozen of those within our business. So that helps us to keep the team on their toes and bring new products. and do things differently, which I think leads me to my final question for everyone and for each of you in particular, is to say, over the next 12 months, if you had the opportunity to go and do one thing for the industry, for your organisation, and it's a piece of advice to the audience in terms of what to focus on. So we're making it really complicated, but keeping it pretty short and simple answer. So Nikki, if there was one thing that you would tell people that you think they need to go do, maybe it's something that people aren't really thinking about, maybe it's something a little bit different, what would be your advice?
I think there's no surprises with this one, especially some of the comments that I've already made. I'd say take a leaf from the Americans' book. They're very good at this. There's a reason why New York is one of the most innovative cities in the world. Network like mad. Reach out to everyone. Share everything you know. Share your contacts. You know, it's a very American thing to do. You know, anyone that's worked in, you know, in the States, that often at the end of a meeting, when you conclude the meeting, you say to the person, how can I help you? Who can I introduce you to? And please, if we can all do this, I think that we can start, you know, wheeling, dealing, you know, swapping insights and, you know, growing the intel about what's happening in the industry. So that's my piece of advice to everyone. And using the PCA is a great platform for that too. I agree, absolutely. And Jonathan, your thoughts?
Very clearly, the Australian real estate sector has not allocated enough capital to investing into real estate related technology. It lacks, so some groups have made very small direct investments, very few have invested into funds. And if you compare it to, you know, some of the US or European groups, they've got a clear strategy that includes both direct, indirect investments, internal teams that are focused on this space, and those teams are direct reports to the CEO. So, the world has dramatically changed, and if you're a retail owner or a commercial owner, you actually need to dramatically change your approach to this space, because the world's actually moving at a far greater pace than most of the Australian groups.
Yep, and look, I'd also agree with that, Jonathan. I'd say just maybe I'll follow up on Nikki's question as well. So Nikki, I'd agree with you, and I'm hoping everyone who's attending is signed up for Congress and is going to go there and network like crazy and swap all their contacts. And Jonathan, I'd agree with you. I had discussions in the last 6 weeks. One, CEO of a decent sized fund in Australia, whose response to a particular issue was, I don't need a system to tell me what to do. When I've been doing this long enough that I can, if it's a good deal, I can feel it in my gut. And as a flip side to that, a person CEO of an Asian fund who's similarly quite experienced and a similar sized fund, and his polarized answer to a similar issue was, if it's not on my iPad, I can't see it. It doesn't exist. And there's a real difference in what's going on in terms of attitudes.
Before Sheridan comes in, so this also is a financial return. Our fund is currently sitting at a 52% IRR. And if any of the real estate groups can show that for their direct assets, then I'm sure they'd be very pleased.
Yes, better than most office buildings. So Sheridan.
Yeah, I would just say the thing that gets me most excited is the opportunity as people come out of COVID and they're really questioning, they're tired, they're questioning, you know, is this what I really want to do with my life? We're seeing the Great Resignation. We call it in the report automation, but I think that's a really bland name for something that we could really dig deep on this year, which is reimagining work and reimagining lives and using technology, and it does exist, to help people take out the stuff that's meaningless and just creates friction in their life. So I am all in for the next 12 months on helping people get empowered to reimagine how they work.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. And thanks to the attendees. And I'll pass back to Jess.
Thank you so much. Tech and innovation in the property industry is a massive passion of mine, and I could listen to you guys talk all day, but unfortunately our time has come to an end. So thank you very much, Bernie, Sheridan, Nikki and Jonathan, for deciphering the benefits and demystifying what can be an incredibly overwhelming phrase, PropTech. And as you've outlined today, there's so many verticals within the industry that PropTech is so broad, and we should really be focusing on the outcomes that we're trying to achieve and empowering the people in the driver's seat, which will ultimately break down the barriers that come with change behaviour. So the concept of digital adoption has felt like a very futuristic state for many people. And as we've learned in the last 2 years, things change very quickly, and investment in technology is absolutely critical. And really, technology and digital should be part of our DNAs within our businesses, emphasised by innovation and collaboration rather than an afterthought. So thank you so very much for deep diving into the journey of digital technology and adoption across the property economy, and explaining the role too that technology will play in helping achieve sustainability targets, which I know is front of mind for many, many businesses. And also Sheridan and Nikki, you touched on this as well, reminding us that people are actually at the heart of technology adoption, and that should be our sole focus, because as we've all learned, collaboration and being together is something that we all crave over the last 2 years. We have recorded today's session, so if you wish to relook over it or share with your colleagues, we'll make the link available to you. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all at Congress as well. I hope you found today really beneficial. Thank you for taking time out and spending it with us.
Thank you.